Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 4, Episode 23, The Quickening. This episode aired May 20th, 1996. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's episode, To the Death?
No, it was perfect.
That episode and this episode do not resemble each other.
No, very different.
Except for maybe the word in the title of last week's, death, comes up a lot in this week's.
We'll talk about it later, but this is very much a Star Trek episode that's talking about a current event of the 90s and something that was very much in the news and the media at the time.
Yeah, and nothing good, so...
Yeah.
Let's just plow through this.
You know, in my opinion, this is probably the grimmest episode of Deep Space Nine.
Of Star Trek in general.
Maybe you're right.
Let's get started and get through this very grim, very difficult episode.
Okay.
In the cold open, we get a shot of the outside of the station, and it appears that the upper pylons all look fine after last week's terrorist attack. Not sure how we fixed that so quickly.
They keep a few spare pylons around.
Oh, so they just plugged in a new one?
Yeah.
Well, once we drop into the station, it seems that Quark has bypassed a bunch of security protocols to add advertisements for his bar all over the station. Odo says tampering with the station's communication systems is a Class 3 offense. But don't worry, we won't do anything about it.
Oh yeah, he's fine.
Worf even comes in annoyed that when he orders prune juice on the Defiant, it comes in a Quark's bar mug and plays the annoying new jingle.
Yes.
Kira grabs Quark and tells him he'd better fix everything before she gets back from the Gamma Quadrant or she'll come to Quark's for some fun. And he immediately grabs Miles's tool and says, "Let me help you with that, Chief."
I think physically threatening Quark with bodily harm is the only way he responds to things.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't know. She seems tough, but she's all talk. I mean, has she ever punched him? She should.
She threw him across the bar once.
Yeah, but you're talking about dramatis personae, where she wasn't even herself, right?
She was her true self.
I mean, that's not even her. I just feel like we make so many threats, but we don't really carry out any of them on Quark. Even Worf, he's like big and he growls, but has he ever done anything? No. We're letting him get away here with tampering with a Starfleet ship now. It's not just the communication systems. He was on the Defiant, or he did something on the Defiant.
Yeah.
That is nonsense that we would let him get away with that.
Yeah, he hacked the Starfleet system.
That can't be legal.
Yeah.
Maybe we didn't know what hacking laws were in the 90s.
True. It wasn't such a big deal.
It wasn't as big of a deal. It was still a thing.
Yeah.
Well, in good news, Kira's hair looks much improved here than it did earlier in the season. It's kind of tamped down a bit of that poofiness that she had going on.
Yeah.
I do approve of that.
They kind of sucker you here with a little bit of an amusing opening and Quark being kind of funny.
Yeah, well, don't get used to it, because now Julian, Dax, and Kira are on the way to doing a biosurvey in the Gamma Quadrant, and Julian is waxing poetic about the wonders of the Gamma Quadrant, and pragmatic Kira is like, the sooner we get out of here, the better. She knows what's what. They don't get very far before picking up a fragmented distress signal about a planet that's been attacked and has heavy destruction and massive casualties. They're asking for any passing ship to help. It's coming from the Teflon system, which is just outside of Dominion space. That's funny. I thought the entire quadrant was Dominion space.
But they seem to have a pretty good handle on the areas that are Dominion controlled.
Yes, somehow they've got it mapped. What exactly, though, is this tiny little runabout going to do against someone capable of destroying an entire planet and causing massive casualties? It seems exceedingly dangerous for us to just fly over there and see what's going on.
Thoughts and prayers.
I don't think that's going to help them very much, but no matter, we fly over there and Dax and Julian beam down to what looks like a pretty dry Southern California landscape with the backdrop of a dilapidated city.
Yes, it reveals a pretty much destroyed city full of wrecked buildings.
Yeah, they walk through a rundown town with lots of crumbling buildings and I would say crumbling people. Everyone is in tatters. That's a very big Star Trek thing. Everybody's always wearing rags.
It looks like something out of the Middle Ages. Or it looks like somewhere that Stargate SG-1 would have gated into.
I'll just take your word for it. Everyone is in tatters and they appear suspicious of these Starfleet visitors, even pointing at them.
Yeah. Not a friendly audience.
Not a friendly audience, and it's a pretty grim sight. A woman stumbles up to them, her face covered in red lesions, and she says, "Don't let me die here. Take me to Trevian," which she says is the hospital. Dax runs off to find out where that is while Julian tries giving her something for her pain. And this bald dude creeps up behind Julian and says, "The blight has quickened in her. There's nothing you can do." He tells Julian to leave and forget about this place.
Yeah.
Dramatic music into the opening credits.
That sounds a little bit fatalistic.
I agree. Let's get out of here. I mean, someone tells me to go, I go.
And you can clearly see how the city is completely ruined.
Yeah, it's a mess. And everybody is just like hanging out in the streets. It doesn't look good, this place.
Yeah.
After the credits, Julian tries giving the woman a painkiller, but it doesn't seem to help. He says the physiology of the people here is so different from theirs. He doubts the blight will be any danger to them. Okay, first of all, we should check this kind of thing before we drop into a planet.
Plus, Dax has different physiology from humans as well, so...
Yes, that's my second point. Jadzia is not human, she's Trill. These people look an awful lot like humans. They don't have anything different about them except for the blight.
Yeah.
So how different could they be? But we couldn't expose them, or that wasn't the story anyway, that Dax and Julian were going to catch the disease.
Plus, there's a lot of extras in this episode, and it would just get really expensive to give each one of them makeup.
Maybe they should have tried that TNG trick and tried like beaming them through the transporters to get rid of the disease and then just beam them back down and everything would be fine.
Oh, yeah. People still shout about that one.
Wasn't that a Pulaski trick?
Yes.
Or it was a Pulaski episode, anyway.
That's the one people got very upset about. Misuse of the transporter.
Oh, please. So much stuff has happened since then. Misuse of everything else.
I find that funny.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me. Dax's hair is down in this scene because she traded her hair clip for transportation to this hospital, which appears to be a woman with some kind of cart. But in the end, we see Julian and Dax carry the woman into the makeshift hospital. So I don't know what the point of that whole thing was. So in the hospital, someone approaches and says she's quickened about the woman that they brought in, and they quickly take her away. Dax notices that every single person they've seen has some kind of lesions on their face. All of the people inside the building seem to have reddened or inflamed lesions.
Yeah.
They're playing calming music, and these patients here all seem to be sitting around and eating and holding these big goblets when the aforementioned Trevian enters. This actor, he looked super familiar to me, but when I looked him up, I couldn't really place why he looked familiar. It's Michael Sarrazin. He was in lots of 60s and 70s movies, but nothing that I particularly recognized. He was in They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Which seems to be one of the things that he's most known for. I don't know what that's about, but I think it has some themes that match across this episode. Jane Fonda plays a character who wants someone to kill her. So I think there is a weird link. Well, the people in the hospital thank Trevian, and one dude gives a speech about how after he quickened, he came here and was able to sleep in a bed for the first time in his life and listen to music while falling asleep. He bathed in hot water and dressed in clean clothes, and now he's here with his friends and his family. And he says this day is everything he dreamed it could be. So they can't bathe or wear clean clothes? Sometimes this episode, I don't understand.
Yeah, and there's no beds.
Yeah. You just have to lie on the ground? I don't know.
I assume so.
Well, Trevian nods at the guy, and then he turns to Julian. He says it was too late for the woman they brought in. If only she'd come sooner, he could have helped. Julian is relieved to hear there's a treatment for the blight, but he says, oh, no, it's always fatal. He doesn't get into a conversation with Julian, even though Julian's asking some questions.
Not really.
Instead, he asks why they've come, and Dax tells him about the distress signal. Trevian isn't too impressed with Julian. He says, we too had sophisticated equipment once. 2 centuries ago, we were no different from you. We even thought we could resist the Dominion. He says, take care not to defy them, or you'll suffer the same fate we did.
Yeah, he said the Jem'Hadar destroyed their world, and then the Dominion wanted them to suffer and gave them the blight.
Yeah, he says that the Jem'Hadar destroyed their world as an example to others. They were trying to, I guess, prove a point.
Yeah.
And he says, we're all born with it and we all die from it. And when the blight quickens, the lesions turn red and death follows in a few days. He says not many live to be his age.
And it's very painful, apparently.
Julian asks for all the info about the blight. He thinks he can help. Trevian says, you really should go. And then the dude who was thanking him before suddenly has some kind of seizure and hits the ground. When Julian runs to him, everyone tells him to back off. It turns out Trevian gave him some herbs that kills within minutes. He says the blight causes slow suffering, and nobody wants that. Julian cannot comprehend this and calls it murder.
Yes.
So Trevian boots them out of his so-called hospital.
Yeah, Trevian explains how the herbs he gives them causes death within minutes, and it stops those who've quickened from suffering.
Yeah.
And he says, no one needs to suffer needlessly.
Yeah.
And here we get to the crux of the episode, dying with dignity. Now, this was a huge issue in the 90s, certainly the mid-90s, if you remember. The dying with dignity, assisted suicide, Jack Kevorkian, and the absolute media circus surrounding it.
Sure. Dr. Death, he was called.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Back outside, Dax has found the distress beacon in an abandoned building that's been repeating its message for 200 years. Apparently they were the first ones to find it.
It's kind of tragic, really.
Julian considers leaving when a pregnant woman approaches them saying she's never met a doctor before. She doesn't look good. The makeup they've got on her is pretty rough, including some dark rings around her eyes. Her name is Ikoria. Just then, Kira calls to say sensors have picked up 2 Jem'Hadar ships. This woman is played by an actress named Ellen Wheeler, who she's been in a bunch of soap operas. That's what I recognized her from, including as far back as Dark Shadows. But really, she didn't do much else as an actor. She moved into directing.
Yeah. And you see here, before she approached Julian, he was sort of leaning on some of the wreckage and looking around and saying, there's nothing we can do here. We should go. He seemed very dismissive of the whole situation.
Which seemed a little strange for him, but I guess if nobody wanted his help, what was he going to do? And then this person approached, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, maybe somebody does want help.
Yeah.
But first we go to the runabout, and they determine that the 2 Jem'Hadar ships are on a patrol route and probably headed to this system eventually. I'm not sure why the Jem'Hadar ships wouldn't have detected them just as easily.
That's a good point, especially as the Jem'Hadar do seem to have pretty good sensors.
Yeah, one-way sensors, apparently.
Yeah.
Dax and Kira are ready to get out of there, but Julian wants to stay. Kira says they can notify Starfleet to get some help here, but Julian thinks that'll take too long. Weeks, maybe months. And then he tells a story about some other plague that was cured in a matter of days, which seems so comical as we live through this never-ending pandemic right now.
Yes, Baranus 3, where they cured the pathogen in an hour.
Yeah.
It is a little bit of a change from Julian in that the last scene, he's like, there's nothing we can do, we should leave. And then soon as this woman, Ikoria, asked him for help, 180. That sort of side of Julian that we saw in Hippocratic Oath came out, and now he's like, we really got to help him.
Yeah, I didn't really like that part.
Yeah.
I thought he should want to help them regardless of whether or not they think he can, or whether or not they ask him for help.
Right.
These people would be feeling completely hopeless. So it actually doesn't even make sense that anybody would ask him for help. For him to just go, we should just leave. Okay. But I think they only did it to introduce this character.
They were maybe doing that to play up what we see happens with Julian through this episode.
Yeah, probably. Well, Kira agrees it's worth a try to try and help. So she says she'll take the runabout to the Gemkata Nebula and hide out. He says, come back in a week, and with any luck, we'll have a cure by then.
Mr. Overconfidence.
So she's going to sit in the runabout in the nebula by herself for a week?
She can meditate or something.
It seems like at this point, maybe she could just go back, although I don't know how far away they are from the station.
Oh, that's a good point.
Hopefully she has a little TV or something. Maybe she's just happy to be away from Quark.
She could listen to podcasts.
She could. Back down on the planet, Julian and Dax are moving in with the pregnant woman. She just has a tiny space behind some sheer curtains that's part of like a larger area where it looks like a bunch of people are living.
Yeah.
Julian gets all of his equipment set up and he starts doing tests and looking for a cure right away.
Of course.
Eventually, he isolates the virus, which will help them analyze it. Ikoria takes out a big bucket of food that she was saving for her death party. That's depressing.
Just a little.
And she shares that with Dax and Julian. Later, Julian is outside trying to find some more test subjects because he can't just work with Ikoria. He runs into that creepy bald guy from earlier, and he isn't looking too good.
Yeah, his lesions have started to quicken.
Starting to turn red. Julian says there's a chance he can find a cure, and he does a demonstration by helping a kid with a broken arm.
Yeah.
Everyone is impressed except for Trevian, who says others have come and stirred up hope, too. And Julian says he makes no promises, he just wants to help. Trevian makes a bit of a weird threat here and then wanders off.
Yeah, I didn't see that really as a threat because I would expect that in this environment, there would be a lot of real problems, given how desperate these people are, with basically con men.
Oh, yeah.
Turning up and offering fake cures. And then Trevian even says that.
Yeah.
Giving people false hope.
And also taking stuff. They were like asking for payment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I saw that as sort of a warning about, if you like, the local laws or what passes for them, that if you do that kind of thing, you're judged very harshly.
How could they even have any kind of a legal system? They don't even have the ability to make beds for themselves or wear clean clothes or bathe.
I think they just have a mob.
They're not having a court system.
No, it's a mob.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Julian is working, but it's not going great because he doesn't have enough tissue samples.
Yeah.
Ikoria isn't sure that they deserve his help. She says, it's like we've come to worship death. For her, getting pregnant changed her attitude, and she wants to live for the baby. And then Dax comes in with some more volunteers, including the bald guy, who is definitely quickening. He looks even worse.
Yeah, he looks very rough now.
Yeah.
I liked how in an example of sort of the gallows humor, he says, I cancelled my death for you.
Yeah. I wasn't finding anything funny at this point.
It's gallows humor. It's not really that funny.
Now we've got a room full of patients, but the news isn't great. The worst ones seem to have stopped responding to the meds that they're supplying.
Yeah.
They hope the bald guy starts responding to the antigen soon. Later, Bashir is getting some air when Ikoria comes out to tell him that the bald guy's white blood cell count has gone up, which seems positive. Ikoria and Julian chat for a bit, as she seems to be hero-worshipping him. And they get into a grim conversation about death coming to everyone, except Julian's childhood teddy bear that was his first patient.
Yes, an immortal teddy bear that still lives to this day.
And then Dax suddenly calls for Julian, and he rushes in to find that the bald guy is suffering really badly. Turns out the virus is mutated because of the EM fields of the instruments they brought. They rush to shut everything down, but it's a grim scene of the sick suffering more and others running from the room in fear.
Everything is going wrong.
And the bald guy dies, and Dax stops Julian from trying to revive him because it's just pointless. And Trevian comes in and starts giving out his special death herbs to kill those who are suffering.
It's the way he says, "What have you done?"
Yeah, it was awful. And Julian is just standing in the middle of all this suffering and death and probably feeling like a total failure because he is. He actually just made it worse for these people, not better in any way.
And carrying on the theme of dying with dignity, he says to Julian, "Get out the way. She's asking for me. You have no right to interfere."
Yep.
And gives her the fatal herbs. The bit I noticed there, and it was a nice little touch, was after Trevian lays her body back down, he sort of places her hands together over her chest. I thought that was interesting because it sort of showed that Trevian had respect for these people, that he was treating the only way he could.
That's one view, yes.
And Julian, like you say, is standing in the middle of all this, and everyone is calling for Trevian.
Yeah, it was a grim scene.
Oh, indeed.
And it's even worse the next morning because he's just surrounded by body bags, and he's completely perplexed by what's happened.
And the way you saw that slow transition from the building at night through to day.
Yep. This episode was directed by René Aubergenois. He directed Hippocratic Oath, and then he directed this one.
He's pretty good at medical dramas. I wouldn't call this a medical drama, though.
No. Julian is distraught that he didn't notice his instruments were causing harm. And what he's maybe feeling worse about is that he was looking forward to Kira returning the next day and being able to casually tell her what a genius he is by curing everything.
Yeah.
And he says there is no cure. The Dominion made sure of that. And he was too arrogant to think he could find a cure. Dax says, yes, that was arrogant, but it's even more arrogant to think that there's no cure just because you didn't find it. So stop feeling sorry for yourself, Julian.
Ouch.
Yeah, tough love.
Dax initially tried to be conciliatory here because Julian didn't really have any idea it was their equipment.
She did.
But at the same time, he says that he saw a change in the viral base pair and he didn't know why. Maybe he just skipped that over or thought it didn't matter. And this has just completely bitten him in the butt.
Yeah.
But she seems to get genuinely annoyed when that arrogance comes out and he says, well, if I can't find a cure, no one can. Trevian's right.
But I also feel like she's saying to him, you're not the victim here. Get over yourself.
Oh, yes.
These people are the victims and you are full of yourself. So let's move on.
You have a bruised ego. It's not the same.
Yeah, poor baby. Out in the street, Julian is not very popular. He bumps into Ikoria and finds her lesions are red and inflamed, so she is a goner. She really thought she'd make it long enough for the baby to be born. Julian says he's sorry, but she says he gave her hope that she hadn't felt since her husband was alive.
Oh.
Ugh.
Yeah, they meet in front of this, what looks like a large mural of how the city looked before it was destroyed.
Which her husband drew.
Yeah.
We go to the runabout, and Julian tells Kira that he can't leave these people, not now. So she tells him to contact the station when he's ready to return. Dax and Kira wish him well and beam him back down, and people seem to run away from him when they see him now.
Yes.
Which is deserved, I'm afraid.
Yes, he's got all that gear with him, and there's just two guys in the background, and as soon as they see Julian, they start basically moving away.
Yeah. They're like, your stuff is terrible.
I just hope Julian has everything powered off, because walking around there with active equipment, if the EM field causes the quickening, he could kill a lot of people.
I think by this point, he does finally have stuff turned off. So Julian continues looking for answers with Ikoria. He's confused why the antigen he gave her isn't in her bloodstream anymore, and he assumes her immune system rejected it. He tells her there's really nothing else he can give her, and she kind of turns away from him as she is in tremendous pain. I almost stopped watching then.
Wow.
I'm not sure what this episode was trying to teach me, but I don't like it.
I couldn't decide there whether she was losing faith in Julian or she just didn't want him to see her in pain, because he really was trying.
Yeah, I think it was because she didn't want him to see her in pain. And she also may have been doubting her own decisions at this point.
Right.
Later, she's in really bad shape, and Julian says he can't induce labor on the baby for another 2 weeks. So if she wants the baby to survive, she's going to have to just suffer. Though I was totally confused by the timing of this, because Trevian said earlier that once the quickening started, you were gone in a few days. So how is she going to survive for 2 weeks? Was it through the treatments that Julian was giving her? Are we supposed to believe they were helping?
I was making the assumption that the treatments were prolonging her life, but they weren't actually fixing the problems.
Well, from here, it only gets worse for Ikoria. Trevian comes to see her and offers to end her suffering, saying, your child will have known nothing but peace, so kill the kid too. But she says no. He and Julian have a chilly chat before Trevian leaves.
Yes. She says her child deserves a chance to live.
Ugh. Thank God we're almost to the end of this. Eventually, she goes into labor. It's like mercifully.
Yeah, and we get the most ungraphic birth scene ever on TV.
I'll take it for everything else we had to put up with in this episode. Well, the good news is the baby appears to have absorbed the antigen and been born without the blight. So Ikoria is able to see her healthy baby for about 1.2 seconds before she dies.
Yes.
The acting in this scene is not great. I couldn't even tell what Alexander Siddig was trying to do here. I couldn't tell if he was laughing or crying. The whole scene was awful.
It was...
This whole episode is a total nightmare for me.
Oh, yeah. You did not like this one. But the good news is the baby is free of the blight.
But look what he's born into.
Yeah, well...
He'll be the only person there without the blight. Oh, but we don't have clothes or...
beds.
You can't take a bath, and we don't have beds, and oh, your mom's dead.
Less than ideal.
And Julian shows the baby to Trevian and the hospital people, who are shocked.
Yes.
He says it's not a cure. It's a vaccine that will protect the babies, but not really help anybody else. He says he'll show Trevian how to make it and get it distributed. And Trevian seems quite thrilled.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Trevian says, you found a cure. And then him asking, how do I make this?
Yes.
It was sort of a turning point of how they portrayed Trevian until this point.
True. Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure I even believe any of these people would have survived. They can't even, like I said, they can't even wash themselves. This episode is stupid. They would all be dead from other infections. I don't know why everybody's so excited about this. I don't have to like it.
Yeah, I know you don't.
So now Julian is watching as people in the street seem super excited by this news, as Trevian is holding up the baby in the air like it's the Lion King or something. Honestly, okay, watching this scene, all I could think was, why would any of these people be excited? They are still all gonna die.
Yes.
And for those who are not pregnant, you're done. The joy of this scene was so stupid.
Really?
Awful.
You and I seem to have very different perspectives on this. I saw that this was a hope for their people.
But they spent the whole episode telling us it didn't make any difference because everyone was going to die anyway. That whole conversation that Ikoria has with Julian is just that. Well, no matter what you do, we're all going to die anyway.
But I think this is the point. It's giving hope for the next generation. The women who are pregnant, the people who want to have a family, the kids are not going to suffer from this.
No, but they're still going to die. That's the message of this episode. Everything is hopeless and horrible. There is no positivity in this episode.
But the next generation are going to have it better. Actually, you know, it will be one of those events where the older generation will be able to say to the kids now who don't have it that it was worse in their day.
God. Back to the station, thank God. Julian continues working on a cure, and the computer just keeps telling him, fail, fail. So it's not going well. Cisco comes to compliment his good work as the computer reports another failure.
Oh, I liked how Cisco quietly says, good work.
Bashir says people are going to keep dying, and Cisco says yes, but their children won't.
My point.
But no, they still will. We have mercifully arrived at the end of this episode. What is your over-analysis? And please do not torture me.
You do kind of see a 180-degree turn from Julian, from his very upbeat mood at the start of this episode, and the we can cure anything. It took us an hour on that other planet, to this Julian at the end that is kind of humbled by his experience.
Look, I believe really strongly that growth comes from humility. And I talk about it at work. I talk about it with people quite frequently because that's true. Once you are humble enough that you don't know everything, you can start to learn some things and you can start to improve yourself.
Yeah.
So love that part of the message. Yes. But I don't understand why they had to drag me through broken glass for that.
Right. This is the episode where I say I really started to like Julian, because it's the first one where Julian, I think, has behaved like a human.
I'll give you that. Still the most depressing thing Star Trek has ever done to me.
Oh, God, yeah. Absolutely. Unquestionably.
It was sad, and then it got sadder, and then it was awful. Plus, won't the Jem'Hadar just come back and do this again? Won't they just give a different blight to the kids?
I suppose it's possible, but I think it would take them a while to rebuild their civilization, so...
Yeah, as soon as things get better, they'll swoop in and make them terrible again.
It's possible.
I have never felt so hopeless at the end of a Star Trek episode. Of all 800 things I have watched of Star Trek.
Wow.
Never have I felt this terrible at the end.
That's interesting. I saw it as a very rough episode, but I still saw a somewhat hopeful episode for the children of the victims.
I will say, after watching someone die a horrible death, which was really difficult for me and something I had PTSD about for some time, I struggle in movies or TV shows when somebody has some really, to use a Joey phrase, wisdomous thing to say on their deathbed. Or they make some pithy comment, or they reveal some big secret, because that's not what happens.
That's TV.
Okay? It's grim and it's horrible and it's awful. And so I struggled after that event, watching that in fiction. I have to tell you, watching what it's like is worse. I didn't need to be reminded how awful that can be. And I doubt anybody else who's gone through that needed to be reminded of how awful it is. At the same time, I have a respect for what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to run a parallel with probably the AIDS HIV crisis that was going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And also, you're right, maybe they're trying to make a statement about Dr. Kevorkian, because that was also in the news.
Yeah.
So I respect that you want to be involved in those kinds of stories. But what I think disturbs me is I don't know that I needed it in Star Trek.
Yeah.
I wait for the hope at the end of Star Trek. I wait for the hope for humanity and for the future. And I felt so hopeless about this. I just didn't see what the positive was. Because even though, like what you're saying, but the next generation is going to be an improvement. And then the next generation from that will be an improvement. I do agree with that. But they took time in the episode to tell me that it didn't matter.
For all the people that were there.
When Ikoria told Julian, you're all going to die anyway, that's not what I want from Star Trek. It's so much like telling someone that their pet is going to die, which has happened a couple of times, not to us, but in our lives with people we know.
Yeah.
What? Why? Everybody knows that. You don't need to tell me that. And I
know what you mean.
Don't like it here.
Interesting.
I didn't want to watch this. I didn't want to talk about it. But here we are. I want to move on to the next episode, please.
Well, thank you for doing it, Cam.
Okay, we've wandered down a path. I'm sorry. Let's take you back to your over-analysis.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier, this episode is about dying with dignity. And what's interesting, I think, is looking back on this, there was a complete media circus surrounding it at the time. And crazily, this Star Trek episode, I think, presented both sides in a really balanced way, which the media certainly wasn't doing at the time. I mean, it was, clickbaity crap. Even before clickbaity, the media loved that kind of stuff. So it's good in some ways to see a Star Trek that dealt with a real-world issue, two real-world issues, and did it in what I felt was a very thoughtful and balanced way.
I agree. On that topic, they did show that in a balanced fashion.
Yeah.
Not leaning too much in either direction and really giving that character the opportunity to talk about the respect of the dignity of these people and to show it, and then to not be sort of nutty at the end. He was just like, oh, help me make this vaccine.
Yes.
I will distribute it. So yeah, I agree. They made that character pretty good.
Well, that's something I really liked, was the Trevian character.
Yeah.
They initially threw him in as this was a bad guy, but he really isn't.
He isn't. But when Ikoria made that point about we've grown to worship death, I think that was really interesting because that is what they were starting to do. But they were mostly, it was like the only thing they had to look forward to.
Yeah.
So they could plan for their own death and make it special, and prepare their little feasts and whatever.
Right.
But it's still death. So I thought when she said that, when she said we've grown to worship it, now you're starting to think, well, wait a minute. He is sort of helping them do that. I still feel like if that's what was really happening, I don't think they would have lasted for 200 years. Honestly, I think they would all have been dead long before this.
Yeah, interesting.
Again, secondary infections. They got no hospitals. They got no way of treating anything. They couldn't even treat the kid with the broken arm. They don't have beds. They don't bathe. They're not lasting 200 years. I am by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on to a different point. Do you think this is the first time in Julian's life he's actually suffered a failure?
No, he came in as salutatorian or whatever the heck it was.
Yeah, it's still not necessarily a real failure, not a professional failure. I felt this episode was giving Julian the first taste of we don't always win.
Yeah, this was the first foundational shake for him that we've seen. Yeah.
Agreed.
But it's episodic, so next week he'll forget all about it.
Oh, he'll be fine. Next thing.
Yeah.
Can the Federation really help if they're that close to Dominion space and the Jem'Hadar patrol this area?
Yeah, would they?
Yeah, it seems a bit dangerous.
Dangerous, and also, would they? We get into that whole thing about them in the Prime Directive and interfering and...
Well, I'll say about the Prime Directive. This was a race that had already made interstellar contact, obviously. They didn't seem shocked by the fact that Julian and Dax were from another world.
Right.
They were victims of a military assault, an attack on the planet. So I don't think the Prime Directive would apply in this case because it's more of a relief effort than changing their evolutionary history.
But Sisko is still talking about interfering.
Yeah.
Like when he was in the Mirror Universe, he talked about how I don't want to interfere. And all those people already knew about space travel.
Yeah.
So there's still a thing about them interfering.
Yeah.
Unless they like them. So, they might turn up and not like these guys because it wasn't looking too good.
Yeah, they weren't being too friendly.
They were spitting at Julian. It was terrible.
Yeah, well, he did kind of screw up badly.
Clothes were bad. Yeah, I agree with you. This is a very dangerous location.
Right,
I don't know that we really would have come out here. Maybe we would have sent a ship or two, a small ship or two.
Yeah, hide in the nebula and see what you can do. Okay, next one.
Yeah.
The intermediate term societal impacts. There will be now a whole generation growing up that does not have the blight and will be able to use electricity, which generates EM fields. So they could start rebuilding a technological society.
Yep.
And if the Federation help, they can really potentially accelerate things. You would have a real problem with people who still have the blight that this technology would impact. So you'd almost have to keep them separate from the people who can use electricity or use devices. Granted, Trevian said how most of the people with the blight die before they even reach childbearing age. And he was like in his 40s and said there wasn't many people like him. There was very few of his age. So it wouldn't necessarily last very long, but it would still be something you would have to take into account in that society.
I'm telling you, this is the most awful episode. There's no hope for any of them. This is terrible.
You and I have a different view of the hope in this episode.
But you're outlining one of the terrible things.
I see it as an evolving hope.
What are they going to do? Put them all in internment camps? Here you go. Just sit here till you die.
No, I think you just have to have areas where you couldn't have EM fields, where you would have to keep equipment out of.
You'd have to build a Faraday cage big enough for everybody to sit in until they're dead.
That could certainly help. So I still see it as hopeful. But next point. I also feel this is an episode where maybe Star Trek over-exaggerates the power of their enemies.
Yeah.
So the Dominion can design advanced viruses that are effectively untreatable, that mutate when they're near technology, and use them on their enemies.
Yeah.
Why do you need the Jem'Hadar?
They could have just left that on Earth when they were there.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
If they're designing weapons that effective, and you've already got founders in the Federation, turn it. But that virus, wait a bit, half the planet dies off.
I agree. This was an overreach. Unless that was going to be the story.
Right.
Yeah.
And leading on from that final point, this is where you see that the founders are capable of unconscionable crimes against other life forms. At this point, if you're the Federation, or the Klingons, or the Romulans, you have to be looking at this and saying, so when is it our turn?
Yeah.
You should be allying with everybody to stop the Dominion and the Founders, because they have no red line. They have no limiting factor on their actions of what they would do to carry out their agenda. When this is their standard operating procedure, you have to start the war tomorrow, because they are not going to stop.
Agreed.
How do you know they already haven't started this?
Yeah.
I mean, this is literally a case of, okay, this is your wake-up call. You need to fight the Founders and destroy them. There's no waiting around.
The Founders don't need anything.
Right.
They don't need food. They don't need money. They don't need anything. So they don't need you.
They're just interested in control.
They just committed complete genocide and don't care. So if they can do it there, they're going to do it anywhere.
Right.
Trying to pretend like they don't exist or they're not a threat is crazy. But I agree with your earlier point that this is a stretch too far in the story. Not too far for what the Founders would do. I believe they would do this. But I think they've reached too far, and now it's hard to roll that back.
Right. It's like the camping trip where the Jem'Hadar beamed onto the station, through the shields, walked through the containment fields, were cloaked, had no problems. And you're like, okay, the game's over at that point if they're that powerful.
It's like the thing you and I talk about a lot where the Marvel villains have to keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse until they can't get any worse. Yeah. It's impossible. The one guy snapped his finger and killed half the world. I mean, okay.
Right. Yeah, where do you go from that?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my point here. You're right. It's a little bit overreach in the story, which is why you basically have to back this off and never use it again.
I hope so.
And with those happy notes, that wraps it up for me.
Well, I already said 2 of my 3 points.
Yeah.
My third point is it was so stupid that Quark can tamper with the systems on a Starfleet ship and nothing will happen to him.
Right.
That was dumb. It's one thing that he got his little jingle onto the communication screens within the station, but he was on the Defiant.
Right. And Mars has already pointed out how the technology on the station is a mismatch of Bajoran, Cardassian, Federation, and all sort of cobbled together. So it's almost like, you could see Quark easily doing that.
Yeah. So I'm going to just move to women in the future. And there's not a ton to say here. I think Dax was very helpful. And she also told off Julian when he needed it.
Yes.
So she was given some good advice there. Kira was willing to hang out in a nebula for a week, and she never complained. I would have complained. She's like, okay, I'll go sit in the nebula.
Kira's the ultimate trooper.
Yeah, she definitely is. So I don't think there's much to say.
Yeah.
The female character of the aliens, she was fine. There was nothing particularly special about her, so I don't really have anything to say about that. So not much to say there. So let's just go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Okay. This is one of those episodes that totally stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I remember in this and every subsequent rewatch, the underlying emotion is just how angry I feel towards the Founders for their utterly unethical behavior.
And they pick on Odo.
Yes.
They give Odo a hard time for whatever he does. Meanwhile, let's just kill everybody on this planet.
Yeah, they're prepared to use biological weapons.
Cult.
For hundreds of years in a generational crime against this race.
Nazi cult.
And to have a race with an ideology like that, you couldn't have a moral discussion with them. Picard and his high ground approach would mean nothing to them.
Yeah.
As well as it being a really tragic episode and kind of sad or grim, that was the other aspect of it. It sort of made me feel about the Founders of, these people are disgusting.
Yeah.
So, absolute thumbs up because of the reaction it got in me. But wow, is it a tough episode. I honestly found this episode harder to rewatch than even The Visitor.
The Visitor was sad.
Yes.
This was grim. Even Hard Time was sad and a little bit grim.
Yeah.
But it was one guy who was suffering.
Yeah.
And the following week he was fine, so we never talked about it again.
Yeah, we talked to the invisible counselor. He's fine now.
But I respect that it moved you and you found it emotional. It probably moved a lot of people. I hated it.
Wow.
I absolutely hated it.
Really?
I would label it as unwatchable. I would not have watched it. I would have turned it off if I wasn't doing a podcast. I sat through it twice, which made it difficult because I had to do notes. And then I had to edit my notes. And then we walked through it again. I mean, miserable. I don't ever want to watch this again.
Wow.
This is not my Star Trek. I get annoyed when people tell me something isn't their Star Trek. This is not mine. It's too grim. It's too awful.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it again. So I hated it. Thumbs down.
Wow. Powerful.
I can take sad. I sat through The Visitor. The Visitor is one of the greatest Star Trek episodes I've ever watched. I cried my eyes out. This is different. This is personal.
Yes.
Did not enjoy.
Well, The Visitor was a warning from the prophets, so.
Maybe because some of that stuff is not real. Like The Visitor's not, I don't feel it as a real thing. Yeah. There's stuff in here that's too real.
Oh, God, yeah. Agreed.
It's a little bit like when I would watch soap operas when I was younger, because it was something a lot of people around me did. And it was something that was big in college when I was in college. Nobody cares anymore, but it was then.
Yeah.
And when something would happen on the soap opera where one of the characters would get a real disease, it was like, okay, I don't need to see that. Because normally they would get made up diseases, things that weren't real, because it was silly. Soaps are ridiculous. And that fits. But then when they would try to make it real, I would just really be put off by it.
Yeah.
I have enough real already. I'm trying to watch Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
And I just didn't, gosh, I feel bad, honestly, that I hated this so much, but I don't ever want to watch it again.
I find it so interesting how differently you see this episode from me.
This one's going in the vault with Family Business, and it's not coming out.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I dislike them for two very different reasons.
Yes, yeah. Not in the same category, but they can both go into the vault.
Yep.
Okay. Well, with that.
Okay, I think that wraps up Season 4, Episode 23. With mercy, we come to the end of this horrible experience for me. Thank you very much.
Grimmest episode of all time.
Come back next week for episode 24, which better be better.
It is a Ferengi episode.
Oh my God. I was enjoying season 4. What is going on? All right, people, moving on. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at rebingeit@gmail.com or tweet us at rebingeit. We're also on Instagram at rebingeit. You can check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback for us there, and you can listen to all the other Star Trek podcasts on our network, including Star Trek Prodigy, a Rebinge It podcast, and we also cover all of the new shows.
You can also find our podcasts on YouTube, on the Talk Through Media channel, and on the Rebinge It channel. Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.
And you're all gonna die.